Hello, here I am again in the name of the sovereign creator of heaven and earth, the Lord Jesus Christ. We're continuing in my exposition of my translation of Genesis. We've now come to chapter 18, where Abraham saves Lot, quote unquote. I will now read verses 1 through 8. Then Jehovah appeared to him by the oaks of Mamre while he was sitting at the tent door in the heat of the day. And he lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men standing near him. When he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed down to the ground. And he said, My Lord, if I have now found favor in your sight, I beg you do not pass on from your servant. Please let a little water be brought and wash your feet and rest under the tree. And I will bring you a morsel of bread to refresh your heart. That is why you have come to your servant. Then you may pass on. And they said, Do so as you have said. So Abraham ran into the tent to Sarah and said, Hurry, knead 3 measures of fine flour and make cakes. Then Abraham ran to the herd, took a tender and good calf, and gave it to a young man who hastened to prepare it. Then he took curds and milk and the veal which he had prepared and set it before them, and he stood by them under the tree, and they ate. 2 things here. In verse 3, there were 3 men, right? But in verse 3, Abraham says, My Lord, singular. Since Jehovah had already appeared to him, Abraham recognized him and addressed him. I understand it that way anyway. Now, at the end, it was Jehovah the Son and 2 angels, and they eat. At the end of verse 8, they had materialized, obviously, in the form of men, but they wouldn't need food, all right. They didn't need food. So why did they? Well, I suppose it went along with pretending to be men. I don't know. Anyway, they ate. Now let's read verses 9 through 15. And they said to him, Where is Sarah, your wife? And he said, They're in the tent. And he said, I will certainly return to you according to the time of life. And indeed, Sarah, your wife, shall bear a son. Parenthesis. And Sarah was listening at the door of the tent behind him. Close parenthesis. Now Abraham and Sarah were old and well advanced in age. The custom of women had ceased for Sarah. And Sarah laughed within herself, saying, Being old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord being old also? And Jehovah said to Abraham, Why did Sarah laugh, saying, Indeed, will I really bear, I who am old? Is anything too hard for Jehovah? At the appointed time I will return to you according to the time of life, and Sarah shall have a son. And Sarah denied it, saying, I did not laugh, because she was afraid. And he said, No, you really did laugh. For the moment, let's go back and see a few things here. In verse 10, it's Jehovah again. In verse 9, it was plural, the verb plural, but here it's a singular, so it's Jehovah the Son himself who is speaking. Also, it's very clear in verse 13. Now, still in verse 10, the time of life. That presumably refers to the 9 months of gestation, except that we really do not know if it took longer at that time, since people also lived longer. And of course, Sarah was listening. Well, of course she would. You know that. Sarah was going to listen, of course. She would want to know what was going on. You better believe that. Another, Jehovah obviously spoke loud enough so she could hear. He knew she was listening. Okay. Says here the custom of women had ceased. That means that her menopause was history. Now, verse 7, Jehovah is speaking, says anything to heart of Jehovah at the appointed time. Appointed by whom? Well, by God. Also here in verse 14, Jehovah says, I will return. So why did God have to return? Well, perhaps he was affirming his involvement in the pregnancy from beginning to end. Like physically, she couldn't do it anymore, so she would need divine help in the whole process, presumably. All right, we can go on now to the next paragraph that occupies verses 16 through 21. Then the men got up to leave and started out towards Sodom, and Abraham went with them to guide them. And Jehovah said, shall I conceal from Abraham what I am doing? Since Abraham will certainly become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed through him. For I have known him, in order that he may command his sons and his household after him to keep the way of Jehovah, to practice righteousness and justice, that Jehovah may bring upon Abraham what he has spoken to him. Then Jehovah said, directly to Abraham, right? Because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grievous, I will go down now and see if indeed they have done according to the outcry that has come to me. And if not, I will know it. Several things here in verse 16. He's going to guide them. Well, that was just a pretext, all right. For going along, they didn't need any help. Abraham knew that something serious was going to happen. Whenever Jehovah shows up, personally, it's serious. You better believe that. Now in verse 19, and this is curious here, verse 17 on, Jehovah is talking to himself, but obviously he's doing it out loud so Abraham can hear him. Very interesting that. Now, verse 19, Jehovah says, I have known him. I assume that's know in the sense of recognizing or maybe perhaps even choosing. Going on here, still in verse 19, why would God talk out loud like that? Presumably to get Abraham to make the intercession that he did. God could have remained silent and Abraham would not have known anything really what was going on. But God knew he was going to save Lot, I suppose. But as for the content of verse 19, each individual must keep the way of Jehovah in order to receive the declared blessing. Note the phrase that Jehovah may bring. May bring. In other words, there's a condition. Right? 20, verse 20 talks about this very grievous sin. Chapter 19 clarifies that the sin was anal sex. The men even wanted to rape the angels, as we'll see here presently, and that's commented on in Jude, by the way. Now, verse 21 says, I will go down now, God speaking. Whenever the text says that God descends, it's because he will act sovereignly. Well, Abraham understood that judgment had already been determined, and Abraham was going to save Lot if he could. At the end here of verse 21, Jehovah says he's going to see if it's true or not, and you're going to know, well, he already knew the answer. But I take it that the way he expressed himself was part of the reason he actually promoted the encounter with Abraham. He wanted Abraham to do what he did. So let's go on and see what Abraham did. We'll read now verses 22 through 33. This is long, but that's the way it is. That'll finish chapter 18. Then the men departed from there and went toward Sodom, but Abraham still stood before Jehovah. Then Abraham spoke up and said, "Would you actually destroy the righteous with the wicked? If perchance there be 50 righteous within the city, would you destroy it even so, and not spare the place for the sake of the 50 righteous who are within it? Far be it from you that you would do such a thing, to kill the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous should be like the wicked. Far be it from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is right?" Then Jehovah said, "If I find 50 righteous people within the city of Sodom, I will spare the whole place for their sake." Then Abraham answered and said, "Indeed now, dust and ashes, I presume to speak to the Lord. If 5 righteous are lacking from the 50, would you destroy the whole city for the lack of 5? And he said, "If I find 45 there, I will not destroy." And he spoke to him yet again and said, "If 40 be found there." And he said, "I will not do it for the sake of 40. And he said, "Please, my Lord, do not be angry because I speak. If 30 be found there." And he said, "I will not do it if I find 30 there." And he said, "Indeed now, I presume to speak to the Lord. If 20 be found there." And he said, "I will not destroy for the sake of the 20. Then he said, "Please, my Lord, do not be angry, because I speak just once more. If 10 be found there." And he said, "I will not destroy for the sake of the 10. And when Jehovah had finished speaking with Abraham, he departed, and Abraham returned to his place. Now, really, I don't know about you, but I'm a little bit bemused by this. Who did Abraham think that he was? Okay, wanting to teach God about justice. But notice that he says the judge of all the earth. And that, of course, could only be Jehovah himself. Abraham knew whom he was talking to. But since what Abraham did was exactly what God had foreseen, God didn't kill him or anything. It worked out, right? Notice now that what God says in verse 26. Righteous people within the city of Sodom. People had to be within that city for God to spare them. Okay, let's see what else we have here. Now, really, Abraham, he starts with 50, he keeps on going. Finally, he gets down to 10. And I ask you, why did Abraham insist until he reached 10? Well, chapter 19, verse 14 mentions his sons-in-law, plural, would have to be at least 2, making a total of 8 in the family. But if there were, say, 3 sons-in-law, that would make 10 in the family. It would appear that Abraham did not believe that Lot had made a difference for good in Sodom. As a matter of fact, in addition to not winning anyone, he lost his own family. But Abraham was determined, all right? Okay, let's go on and see what we can find. Let's read now verses 19, 1 through 3. Now the 2 angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting at the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose up to meet them and bowed his face to the earth, and he said, "Indeed, my lords, please come into your servant's house and spend the night, and wash your feet, then you may rise early and go on your way. And they said, no, we will spend the night in the square. But he insisted with them strongly. So they went with him and entered his house. And he made them a meal, baking unleavened bread, and they ate. A couple things here. Lot was sitting in the gate. That means that he had already achieved some importance in the city. The fact that Abraham had rescued the people for Lot's sake a while ago probably contributed, but you can see verse 9 below when we get there. But immediately Lot got up and bowed down. It appears that Lot realized somehow that they were not ordinary people. Perhaps through his association with Abraham, he had some knowledge of the supernatural, whatever. He bowed his face to the earth. They said they were going to spend the night in the square. No, Lot knew that just was not going to work at all. So he just keeps insisting, and finally they agree to go in. Now, Lot made something for them to eat. Well, again, they were angels. They didn't need feed. They didn't need to eat. But apparently, because they were acting like men, they went along with the act. But why does it say unleavened bread? Well, leavening takes time, and Lot just didn't have any time. Thank you. Now let's read verses 4 all the way down to verse 11. We're still in chapter 19. But before they lay down, that's the angels, the men of the city surrounded the house, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people of all the neighborhoods. And they called to Lot and said to him, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may know them sexually. Then Lot went out to them and shut the door behind him, and he said, my brethren, please do not act so wickedly. Come now, I have 2 daughters who have not known a man. Please let me bring them out to you, and do with them as you will. Only do nothing to these men, since that is why they have come under the protection of my roof. But they said, stand back, and went on. This fellow came in to sojourn and wants to judge everything. Now we will do worse to you than to them. They attacked the man, Lot, and started to break down the door. But the men, that's the angels, reached out their hands and pulled Lot into the house with them and shut the door. And they struck the men at the door of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they wearied themselves to find the door. A couple things here. Verse 4, I ask, how did the whole city find out in time to participate? Because the whole city was a demonic action. I suppose it probably was. Again, that was a lot of people, all the men from all the neighborhoods. Now, in verse 5, they wanted to rape them. They wanted to know them sexually. That means they wanted to rape them. Jude 7 states that those men, quote, went after a different kind of flesh, end quote. Be that as it may, the flesh that an angel has when it materializes is obviously not human flesh. The men of Sodom also knew that the angels were not ordinary people, and they wanted to rape them. That's what was going on there. Now, poor Lot. Verse 8, this is really pitiful. He offers his 2 daughters. He says they have not known a man. That means they were virgins. Oh dear. But Why did Lot offer up his daughters? Was it because he knew that the two men were angels? Probably so. And at that time, hospitality was taken very seriously, and Lot would do what his best to protect his guests. But even so, to offer up his own daughters, that was an abomination. That was pretty dirty. But the cruel fact was that Lot was in a dead-end street. There's simply no way out. The angels strike the men with blindness. Well, of course, at that point, it became clear that the two inside were supernatural. And obviously, of course, the men outside weren't expecting that. But curiously enough, they didn't quit. Even though they were blind, they didn't give up. They were still determined. They must have been demonized, okay? However, of course, the angels were probably involved. How come they couldn't find the door? Well, probably the angels wouldn't let them, because the men could have found the door by feel. It was just a matter of being blind, all right? But anyway, of course, the angels weren't going to let them break down the door, all right? To finish this video, let's finish also chapter 19. Let's read verses 12 through 14. Then the man said to Lot, whom else do you have here? Take them out of this place, son-in-law, your sons, your daughters, all whom you have in the city. For we are about to destroy this place, because the outcry against them has become very great before Jehovah, and Jehovah has sent us to destroy it. So Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law, who were married to his daughters, and said, get up and get out of this place, for Jehovah is about to destroy the city. But to his sons-in-law, he seemed to be joking. Now, notice that the angels declared that God would take into consideration any people that Lot had won in the city, even though they know good and well that he didn't have any. But notice what it says here. Son-in-law, sons, daughters. The outcry was very great before Jehovah. I asked, who was doing the outcrying? Who was denouncing the iniquity? So it says here, the outcry against them has become very great. So who was doing it? Daniel chapter 4, verse 17 speaks of watchers, presumably a certain kind of angel. Perhaps they were the ones. I don't know. It's a possibility. No, of course, at the end here, as far as the sons-in-law figured that Lot was just joking. They didn't pay any attention. Obviously, the husband's attitude condemned their wives, but the wives probably would agree with their husbands anyway. They wouldn't pay attention. Okay, that's it for this time. Thanks for watching, and God bless.